Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting, whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. A year ago this August, we did an NDE-related show questioning the growing numbers of doctors denying health care to women when their pregnancies go south. Women were being denied care based on the radical notion that preservation of a fetus is more important than intervening to protect the well-being of the pregnant woman herself. As a consequence, there were stories of pregnant women bleeding out in hospital parking lots, miscarrying in restrooms, and being threatened when they traveled to states where health care was still available. In one case, a raped, pregnant 10-year-old girl was harassed and her doctor threatened when she traveled to a state where a doctor was legally permitted to help. So a mixture of confused religious believers being led by exploitive politicians had poisoned the healthcare system for women in this country. In that show, NDE Observations made clear the facts are simple. The pregnant woman is a person, while the fetus is not yet a person and may not have intended to be. The difference has to do with the soul, our spark of the divine that makes us alive. The woman has a soul completely committed to her body until her death. The soul intended for the fetus knows the future, the plan it agreed to, and once we are born, we have forgotten our plan. Some minds do retain one thing, that we should love and care for one another. They retain the understanding that care for the woman should take precedence in almost all situations. The preborn soul retains its plan and takes care of itself. A year later, and things have only gotten worse for women's rights. The agenda for an authoritarian takeover of the U.S. government, a document known as Project 2025, is looking forward to a more far-reaching cancellation of women's rights in general. If Project 2025 gets implemented, a nationwide abortion ban will end care in all states. To make matters worse, laws prohibiting contraception will make the chance of unwanted pregnancies unavoidable. Still, other proposals include outlawing no-fault divorce, the best way to escape abusive marriages, where unwanted pregnancies can further trap women in failed marriages. Some misogynist politicians, like Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina Mark Robinson, for example, are even calling for an end to voting rights for women. Remember, it hasn't been that long since women weren't allowed to have their own bank accounts and credit cards. Women's financial rights could be jeopardized as well. Left in the hands of white male authoritarians, the fiction of The Handmaid's Tale could become an authoritarian reality going from bad to worse, much like the treatment of women in Taliban-run Afghanistan and some other Muslim countries. I titled this show Women's Souls, not because I claim to be an expert on the subject, at least not in this lifetime, but I do believe we can choose to reincarnate again and again, and at times into different races, cultures, genders, religions, economies, etc. So I would like to help prepare the world as much as possible for a good time in my next lifetime as a female. With that in mind, let's begin with one basic life-threatening problem for women: how to deal with something as common as miscarriage in a country gone crazy over women's health care. It's heartbreaking when a long-anticipated pregnancy miscarries or encounters a fatal condition in the womb. Why, despairing parents ask, would God allow our baby to die? Why would a conception even take place if God knew there was a problem with the fetus or the womb? It sometimes comes as a startling fact to young couples that more than a quarter of all pregnancies, some 26%, end in miscarriage. And for those who believe a soul gets handcuffed to the fertilized egg at the moment of conception, it's easy to think that with a miscarriage, a human being has died. Miscarrying with that point of view in mind makes it even more heartbreaking. Some women might assume a man could never understand the emotional and biological impact a miscarriage can cause, but I can claim at least some partial understanding. My mom birthed 4 of us, but went through many miscarriages in between. Growing up the oldest, I witnessed her swings from hope to joy to sorrow when miscarriages occurred. The guilt I've carried since childhood was a moment when my mom told me about a miscarriage she'd just gone through. I wanted to comfort her, but I was just a little kid, and what came out was a dumb remark about at least not having to set up the crib. My mom burst into tears, and I've never forgiven myself for being so stupid. Later, as an adult, my first wife went through the same frustration and loss. It turned out that after our 2 children were born, she could only miscarry. We used contraception as a way to avoid miscarriages, not babies. So my family's miscarriages, along with what I learned from my childhood NDE and others' NDEs, have taught me more than a thing or two about the souls of the unborn. Once before on this show, I mentioned that my mom's first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. I believe I then waited for her second pregnancy to be her baby's soul. And while I couldn't swear to it, I'm thinking this was something I recalled during my NDE. If this is true, it suggests our souls have the freedom to come and go, even wait or not wait for the next opportunity to be born. So let's take a look at what NDEs tell us about the relationship of the spiritual soul to the physical body. Millions of near-death experiences over the years demonstrate that when the physical body dies, the soul leaves that body to take on an advanced understanding of everything, including the intrinsic nature of what we call all-pervasive love. The soul that enters a baby is profoundly wise and committed to a plan for its earthly life, but then that soul mind defers to our baby's brains and human-paced learning schedule when we get born. The brain is grown brand new and eager to learn, while our soul, our body's life breath, forgets for a while the life plan it made. That blank slate enables us to experience being creators ourselves and to see how well we can overcome the selfish nature of our human egos and develop the capacity to love. So when does the soul enter the fetus? The question has become a major concern for religious interests vis-a-vis abortion. The biblical tradition implies it happens with the baby's first breath at birth, and many Protestant churches followed that belief. That is, until political debates about abortion drove them toward the Catholic notion of personhood at conception. But even Catholics balk at baptizing a dying fetus or embryo, implying there's no soul in there to be saved. But NDEers know there's more to the story than that. By the way, as a hospital chaplain, I offered to baptize aborted and miscarried fetuses and those that died in the womb, not only to comfort the parents, but as an acknowledgement that the soul is aware of all spiritual matters, no matter whether the soul is still there or wherever it has flown to by then. NDEers know the soul is ever so much wiser than the brain. When I had my NDE at age 7, my out-of-body soul was no 7-year-old, but a mature being with infinite capabilities. Souls are not tied to a miscarried fetus unless it wanted to be, and knew in advance that the miscarriage was part of the plan. It seems to me that soul remains as free an agent as it chooses to be right up until birth. I've interviewed pre-birth spiritual transformed experiencers who remember being in the womb, others who entered the baby's body at the birth canal, or even as late as the moment of birth. Once born, the soul is committed, locked to the body for the duration of the person's life, of course not counting NDEs. That's why a legal definition of personhood should not be decreed until birth. Before birth, the soul may choose to come and go at will, and in cases of miscarriage or other incidents of womb death, Souls know in advance and may participate or not. So what does that imply? Well, clearly, without a soul, a fetus is only a biologic growth in a woman's body. If it threatens the health of the woman, as it does, for example, in ectopic pregnancies, it's no different than a deadly tumor might be. Fortunately, souls know the whole future of a pregnancy. This is true even to the point of sometimes announcing his or her own birth to the mother-to-be, occasionally even before the conception takes place. It's a bit like the angel Gabriel's announcement to Mary concerning the birth of Jesus, but that's another story. So what does this input from NDE observers add to the abortion debate? At the least, it should mandate all necessary care for the woman who is miscarrying or who needs surgical care for ectopic or other life-threatening pregnancies. It should also approve abortion for the prevention of long-term psychological damage because of rape, incest, or underage victim, or for the removal of fetuses so damaged that they will not survive. Other reasons for an abortion should be left to the woman's discretion in the knowledge that no soul will be impaired by her choice. In last year's show, I interviewed Janice Goff on the matter of her communication with her second child's soul even before conception took place. And she's not alone in such pre-birth communications. But that mature message does not come from the implanted fetus, but from a mature soul who will occupy that fetus in the fullness of time. Janice also tells the story of a soul who asked her to find and comfort the mother who aborted her pregnancy and then succumbed to the overwhelming guilt as a result of the decision. Janice provided some important insights in this interview, so let me close with a portion of what she had to say. So Janice, please tell us about how the soul of your child-to-be spoke to you even before he was conceived.
I was at a lake one night with my first child, who was 8 years old at that time, and we were night fishing. And I stood up, looked at the sky, and heard with my ears, "Hang on, I will be there soon. My name is Matthew."
Huh.
I did not feel anything enter my body at that time. I just knew for sure that, I would be pregnant real soon. So as soon as Kenny came back from, California, definitely was pregnant. And I knew that his name was Matthew and it was going to be a little boy. So I didn't bother to go through all the, pre-birth testing to find out what you were going to have. I just, he had already said name was Matthew, and I knew that would be a little boy. So then my only next job then was to set about and figure out his middle name. So that was, that was the easy part.
Now, when he spoke to you, did he seem like a little child, or did he seem like a mature being?
The voice was not in baby talk. It was more like a mature person. I guess now thinking back on that, I would say like teenage years, real clear, real audible, just a very mature voice. Mature is a good word for that, Lee.
Because I think some people envision like little baby souls getting into little baby bodies, and these are mature beings. These are
yeah, they are.
Yeah. And maybe live past lives, have had experience being alive.
Exactly. And I have since learned, I've only shared that with a few people. Some were, kind of astounded at that. They were not aware that process happens, that, basically the spirit can enter the body before you're pregnant, as it did with my first child. That was, and I'm saying that, enter the body before you even had sex to get pregnant. So people, weren't aware that process happens. But since then, I've visited with several people, and some that you've actually interviewed. One was Robin Lansong, and she said, I hear this a lot. This happens to a lot of people. So she has sort of a track record of this experience that these spirits who are coming to Earth actually do inform us some way or another, either verbally, audibly, or physically. We feel that before we even become pregnant, to have them, birthed within our body. So that was amazing to me, to know that there are a lot of people out there that has this experience.
So that soul can see the future, basically.
Well, that's one way of putting it, Lee.
At least as far as the pregnancy goes, they must.
At least as far as the plan goes, right? There appears to be a plan. I hadn't quite thought about it in that frame of thinking, where, we do plan ahead. And I guess that's where it comes from. People, we've been told from NDEers and all other kind of experiencers that we have chose the life that we're living. The afflictions, the families, we've got a plan before we come to this earth. Now, whether it's specifically ours or whether it comes out of the great oneness that we've all worked together to put together a plan for us to have when we come, I'm in agreement with that. There is some sort of plan when our spirits enter this 3D world.
So in that case, when a fetus miscarries or the woman has an abortion, do you suppose the soul knows in advance and isn't there for that event?
I'm under the impression there are no accidents. And I'm also under the impression, from my experience and confirmation from others, that when our time is up, our time is up. And it doesn't matter what it takes to get us out of this body, whether it's a car wreck, an intruder comes into your home. It doesn't matter what it's going to take to get you out of your body when your time is done. So, that includes abortions. That includes anything. If there is a master plan that we're living out of, all of those things are part of that plan. And we already know that we live by our feelings on a daily basis. So some of this plan in the moment is not comfortable. It can feel, the event can feel evil to us. It can feel stressful. We can have anxiety. We can lose our mind and literally go mental with things. It's not neat and tidy. But if we really focused on the fact that this is part of our plan, of our journey, maybe we would have enough strength to facilitate and maneuver through the event, to not lose our mind, to not go overboard on anger, fear, retaliation, all of those kind of things.
Oftentimes when people have had like terrible accidents, car accidents, they find that they've left their body before the accident, just before the accident. In other words, I interviewed a woman just a couple of weeks ago who was hit by a bus, run over by a bus, but she didn't feel that because she was already out of her body before, just before the accident occurred. So I imagine that, if a soul knows in advance, and if this is part of the agreement, then I would think they would not be there for the actual event. They would either not be there at all, or they would leave quickly before it really happened.
I think it's real important to look at languagely. The word accident came out of the insurance system. And because of that, we have imposed that word on so many things in our life. So if being hit by the bus and leaving her body and having an NDE experience was part of her journey, that is not an accident per the insurance definition of accident. So what else could we call it? It's an event in our journey here on this earth. And I think we really need to watch our language and how it imposes on us definitions for what happens in our life, because we follow those definitions with our feelings. And that's where we end up being angry or distraught, or there's a whole gamut of stuff that follows that word accident and what that means for us. Right. I do remember a great uncle one time fell down these stairs. Now, he was quite an interesting character, and he was down south. So down south, we kind of lived in a different type of system box and belief systems that could, it was different. But when he got to the bottom of the stairs, he got up, he leaned up on his elbow and he said, "Well, I am so glad that's over with." and I remember that my whole life. And I'm like, he recognized even unconsciously that there was some part of a plan here. Right. And I'm glad that event is over. He didn't get up and complain he had an accident, his hips hurting, or he broke his rib, blah, 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 blah. He
was all part of the plan.
That was over.
Well, something like more than 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriages. So I wouldn't think that souls would be announcing themselves or even entering a fetus if they thought if they knew that it was going to miscarry as part of the plan.
Well, I think it was Jesus that used the phrase, "in the world, but not of the world." And that is part of the description of what happens when a spirit comes into the body. And no matter how much time it's got here and it leaves, quite often part of the plan was just to come through this arena, but not to stay here. Be in the world, but not of the world. You don't live here. So part of the plan is to journey through this world and the energy, the dimensions, whatever all of this means to, that powerful spiritual beingness that didn't stay here. They just needed to come through this arena.
Now, you had an experience of a soul coming to you and asking you to intercede with the mother who'd had an abortion to comfort her.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
The mother was a woman that I actually knew, or I knew of. She wasn't a close, like in my basket, close contacts, but I did know her, and her life was a wreck. She had done everything she could do to sabotage her life, and because she lived constantly in grief and anxiety. So we're talking, heavy drug use, alcoholism, mental illness, sabotaging relationships, couldn't hold a job, all of the living in her car, for a while, all of the things that you do when things are not neat and tidy, and it's very uncomfortable life. So what I did not know, because evidently she hadn't revealed too much to too many people, was that she had an abortion. Now, I didn't know this until later on. So I had this little spirit that came to me one night and said, "I need you to tell my mother that we made this plan and that we were in agreement." And she didn't use the word plan. She said that we were in agreement that I would come through her, only come through her. And so she said, "I need you to tell my mother that, because she's destroying her life and she has a whole life to live and so much to give to others." So Um, I don't know, as it happened, maybe within 2 months, I did see this gal, and I said, I have something I need to share with you, because she didn't know too much about my life. I didn't know too much about hers. It was not it was not real comfortable in the beginning, but I'm ready to jump into it regardless of the outcome because I knew it was true.
Mhm.
And so I told her, I said, I had this little female, it was a little girl, little female spirit come to me and tell me that I needed to tell you that y'all had made an agreement that she would come through you, but not live here. And so this gal breaks down crying, and I'm really affected as well, but I'm kind of waiting for the rest of the story. And she began to tell me that, yes, she had an abortion. In fact, she initiated the abortion herself, which destroyed part of her internal organs at that time as well. But she did. So the grief that she had been living with was that she killed her baby. And that was driving her insane. So the very fact that someone basically doesn't know anything about her life comes to her and says, you and this other person, before you came to earth and before she came to earth, you were in agreement that you would help her come through the world but not stay here. And that lifted a mega weight off this woman. She turned her life around, and the help groups that she began to start for aborted grief was just amazing. And this was in the Omaha area. And the people's lives that she began to touch, because she knew intimately what these people were going through. So this changed her life completely. But it doesn't always happen this way, that we get to a point of consciousness that we understand there is a plan, Lee, and you use that word was really good. There's a plan. And I just happen to not believe in accidents. I believe each one of us has a journey to fulfill, and we can make all the best laid plans, but we already know the universe, God, whatever is going to straighten this out. And when the changes are made to modify the way we think we should be driving our plan and going in a particular direction, is not always neat and tidy. Sometimes we're angry, it doesn't feel good, it's, this and it's that, whatever. But there is a plan. And if you believe in that word accident and you disconnect it from the insurance definition and make it your own, I think you're going to constantly live in confusion about your own journey.
Wow, that's a powerful story. Well, thank you, Janice. I wanted to get your input on this. Let me ask you one other thing. I've always wanted to talk about on the show that you witnessed, I think, an Indian ritual that restored a child's had a disability.
Yeah, a child's mind. That was amazing. I'll never, ever forget this. This child was, I think he was like 4 years old. He had never talked. He didn't have body functions, complete body functions. He was constantly having to be held and couldn't walk. They had to feed him, blah, 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 blah. So when you see a child like that, something's drastically wrong, and you can call them by medical has a box all of us fit in. So, whether this child was considered a mongoloid or I have no idea. All I know is this child was heavily handicapped. You looked into the little boy's eyes. There was no one home. It was the eyes were there staring out, but totally vacant, was not watching movement, didn't appear to be hearing anything or seeing anything that attracted him. And, going on 4 years old, we've got this generally a real active child, regardless of what disability they've got. Anyway, one of the elders had went into ceremony, and this was Sioux in South Dakota. One of the elders had went into ceremony on behalf of this child. And he fasted and prayed and went into the sweat lodges and brought other elders in because this particular elder and a medicine man knew that this little boy held a miraculous spirit that could do some amazing things for their people. But in the condition this little boy was in, he would never even grow to be, a functional adult. So they invested all their time and resources into the ceremony. And during this time, the elder was told that the little boy's mind had never connected into the body. So basically, then the whole tribe came together to have a ceremony to birth the mind into the child. So how do you have a body on earth with a brain, with all body functions, and can eat, but is totally unaware and can have, bowel movements and urine and all these things that's controlled by the brain, but no mind? Now that leads me to way more questions than I have scientific information or knowledge to connect about the mind and the consciousness being outside our body and needing to connect into our body. But this is what they understood that and had a ceremony to birth the mind into the body of this child. And it was one of the most moving things I will ever have happen in my life, is to see this child actually come alive. And it was like, when you give a pair of these glasses to people that are can't see, and you give them that pair of glasses, and all of a sudden they can see the light, they can see their parents, they can see it, and it's so emotionally, physically, and spiritually moving. And that depth of being in the presence of that little child coming alive was, it was all encompassing for me. It was more than just being present for the literal birth of a child in labor and delivery. It was huge in my life. But there again, it brings up way more questions than I've ever had answers for. And I've never heard of that happening again since then. I imagine it has, because the children in India and the families in India report all kind of miraculous things happening over there. So I'm assuming this does happen more than my little person is aware of.
But you saw the results immediately?
Lee, it was within the hour that this child began to wake up and look around, and oh my gosh, then there was dancing and celebrations, and the food came out, and by then the little boy's running around, touching people and raising his arms up to be hugged and held, but different, because before he had to be hugged and held as a lifeless little person. Yeah, it was just, and then, at 4 years old, now you've got to learn about your world and how to respond in your world. So he had missed a lot of social education just by being present with a family. So, the tribe did come together to help this family actually raise the little boy in his body. And he did go on to be a real powerful medicine man and ceremony. So he was connected in a way that we don't understand. If you don't have your mind and consciousness in your body, you're still connected to spirit and all the great oneness. So what are you getting? I don't know. I just know that he became a very powerful spiritual medicine man at a young age. By teenager, he was teaching people and had totally thrown himself into learning about the earth and letting the earth teach him how to heal afflictions within his own people. Yeah, it's quite a story, Lee.
It is. Well, Janice, thank you so much for telling us that, and especially the story about the soul that came and said, well, this was all a part of the plan to begin with. Thanks. Thanks for being on the show.
You're so welcome. It's always just awesome to get to share these things, and I love listening to everyone else that comes on your show and has all these amazing things to share. We have so much to learn from each other if we have the medium to do that, and you are supplying, a very powerful media for us to all hear each other's experiences, and I thank you for that.
My thanks to Janice Goff for sharing some of her personal experiences with us, and thanks to you for listening. If you'd like to hear this show again or any of our more than 500 archived, ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. And be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.